Grant. I'm with Eberspaecher, and I'm here today for another technical training video on how to service the M-II heater. It's a great heater and probably one of the lesser known because they really don't fail much. So let's get to it. So we're going to start with what tools do you need to work on the M-II heater. It's good if you have a straight pick, a 90-degree pick, a small pair of needle nose pliers, a 2.8 and a 1.6 micro timer disconnect tool. You'll need atomizer screens because this heater actually has 2 atomizer screens in it, and that's really for the preventive maintenance. That's your main point, is the atomizer screen replacement. It's good to have a small bore brush. We'll talk about that later. You'll need a T20 and a T25 bit, Torx bit. To unscrew the igniter to put the atomizer screen in, you'll need a 12mm wrench. We have a couple other tools off to the side here we're going to talk about later. This is a 5/16 all thread bolt with the end ground to a point, a nut, and we have a couple different size washers. This is going to be a point to cover later when we're trying to take out the atomizer screen that you can actually use on the Hydronic heaters also to take their screens out. And then to utilize this, you'll also need a 13mm wrench, and better off if you have a 13mm ratchet and socket. So with all that said, let's get to work here. On the M-II, you have a coolant pump here. We're gonna leave a couple of things on just for speed-wise, but the coolant pump unplugs. I'm gonna leave it on the water jacket for right now. My recommendation, we have taken the clamp off of it just to save a little time in the video. There's just a band clamp that goes around it, and it's an O-ring seal here. So you could actually pull this off. Anytime I service this heater, I always replace all the O-rings. When you put the O-rings back in, and this goes for the sensors and the pump, use a synthetic lube, nothing petroleum based, and lube these O-rings before you put them back in. So we'll set this pump aside for right now. Okay, so we got 2 pieces we have to take off to start out with. There's an upper cover and a lower cover. I personally like to take the lower cover off first. There's only 2 screws, and this is a T25. So I like turning it over because when I'm turning this over, the blower's under here, so I don't want to bump the blower motor at all. I'm very cautious with my blower motors. So you have a T25 there, and a second one here. The cover then comes off and exposes the electrical connectors that we will need to access later. I'll set the cover to the side. Now, just to save the cover, there's clips on both sides that hold the cover on. It's recommended to start on this side with the rear clip. You can use a screwdriver. Sometimes I'll use my 90-degree pick, and I'll just come in behind it and I will pry it up. Please do this with a warm cover. This is plastic, and if you're gonna do this while it's stone cold, you may break the cover. If you break the cover, we will talk about that next. So I have lifted that side up. I come over here and I lift this side up. In reality, this is probably about the hardest part of the whole service of this heater. So the cover comes up. There's a grommet, the fuel line comes through there. Now, if you happen to break the clips, we do sell the covers, but if you look on the underside, there are pilot holes that line up with holes in the casting. So if you don't want to replace the cover and you need to hold it down, you can use self-tapping screws, use the right size. When you take the cover off, there's an O-ring that goes around the fan. Please be careful with this O-ring. Retain that O-ring because it must go back on. So I have now got it off to there. When I am going to separate the water jacket from the body, this is your ECU, your electronic control unit, and your fan. I actually come in here and I will take my sensors out, because anytime that I'm going to service this heater, I'm replacing O-rings. This is where the T20 bit comes in. So you have two little retaining clips with a simple screw. You have one that comes in from the side here. The one on the end here is your overheat sensor. The one that's closest to the burner head itself is your temperature sensor. The clips are the same clips, so you don't have to worry about getting mixed up. Now, sometimes it takes a pair of pliers to grab a hold of these. Either just in there with an O-ring, pull the sensor out, and the wires will pull straight out. For the one that's here, you can either do one of two things. You can take a pair of pliers and pull it out, or if it's easier, you can see it down through here, and if you put your screwdriver in there, you can actually pop it out. Now your sensors are released. At this point in time, your water jacket is separated by taking these 4 screws out. Now this actually is back to the T25, which I forgot to switch. But the T20 does fit, but we will do the T25. You have, turn this around so you can see you have 4 screws. A cordless is great to take these heaters apart. I do not recommend putting them back together using a cordless. I put the screws in and hand tighten everything snug by hand. I do not use a cordless. But taking them apart, a cordless does speed up the process. At this point in time, the water jacket pulls right off. And there's your water jacket. We'll set it to the side. Now, if you look on this side, there's a plastic tab that's actually sandwiched between the lower plate and the upper cover. The tab will just pull right out. There is a top and the bottom. If you noticed, there is ears here, and then it's narrower here. The narrow part goes down, the tabs are up. Reason I'm doing this is I need to get to my igniters. So at this point in time, if I was going to be servicing a burner chamber, here's the 3 screws for the burner chamber. If I'm going to service the heater for a PM, as in the atomizer screens, you take these 3 screws out and you expose the igniter and where you're going to do your service for your atomizer screens, because they are under the igniters. If you've noticed, I've tried not to set it on the fan itself. The burner chamber slides out. I would get your wires out the side here. There's a grommet that holds the wires for the igniters that seals in here. The grommet is slotted on this side. There's also a gasket here. If you're going to service this heater, you should have a gasket on hand. I slide the wires out of the grommet. And let's say I was going to service this igniter here. Really, at this point in time, all you're going to do is take a 12mm wrench and you're going to unscrew it. Just loosen it there. But we need to disconnect the wires at the main connector. So at this point in time, there's a tab here that you unlock to take the connector out here. There is what's called long and short. When you're looking at igniters and they refer to it as long and short, what they're referring to is this would be the short, this would be the long, because one has to travel across the top and down, and one is just down. So the one that's closest to the side where the slot is going to be the longest. So the longest, you'll notice later, is normally wrapped around the rest of the wires so that it tightens everything up in here and keeps everything away from the flame detector that is very hot. So I need to decide which one is I'm servicing, or if I'm just servicing them both, I would unpin them both. They are the same part number, they are the same part, but when you repin them, you need to remember which one is long and which one is short. In the manual, there is a diagram and it refers to it as long and short igniters. So the brown and the white are my wires. So if I'm going to service this, I will see my brown here. I come through with a 1.6 disconnect tool and pull the wire out. I also come through and find the white, unpin it, and pull it out. At this point in time, because if you're going to take this heater apart, you might as well do both atomizer screens. It's just well worth the time. I will come over here. I will find my brown and white of the second igniter. Unpin. And last but not least, I will come down and unpin. Now, I have released all 4 wires. I can take my gasket, I can replace my gasket, I can remove it. So we've taken the burner chamber out with our igniters still in it. I remove the wires out of the grommet. I usually pull the grommet out of my way. The igniters themselves are actually only in there at 3 foot-pounds. So these are not very tight in here. So they should just be snugged in there. So at this point in time, you unscrew the igniters. Please take care not to break your wires. I take my igniters out. I always, any time I take it apart, replace both atomizer screens. If I see one was all plugged up, you're in here, and as inexpensive as the atomizer screens are, please replace them both. So, some tricks on getting the atomizer screens out. One, this works for the Hydronic series also. If you take a 5/16 all thread bolt with a nut and a washer, it's best if you have a ratchet that you can push down on this. I'll chamfer the end of the bolt a little bit so it starts in there, but as you turn that down in, it will dig into the screen. I can then spin the nut down. If I hold the head and keep turning the nut down, it will draw the screen out. The other way is I call pick and pull. I'll take a straight pick, I'll get in here, I'll get between the screen and the wall, and I'll bend it in. I go to the other side, I bend it in. If it's very bad, break it free all the way around. But then I'll take a small pair of needle nose, I'll get in and around, I'll grab, twist, pull. Now the screen is out. You must remember to clean the ventilation holes. To clean the ventilation holes, you can take a pick and you stick a pick through from the inside, a 90-degree pick, or in this heater is actually quite easy. You can strike a straight pick and clean from the outside. The way you'd know if you need to replace the atomizer screens or the ventilation hole, the telltale sign is a heater that smokes at startup, the heater starts and the smoke goes away. You're replacing atomizer screens and ventilation hole. A heater that smokes at startup and the smoke does not go away. Usually I'll start out with a fuel system, which is a fuel filter normally on the inlet side of the fuel pump, and you may get to having to do this also. If you have a heater that smokes and does not start, it very well may be the atomizer screens and ventilation holes or the fuel filter, because this starts the pilot flame that lights the primary flame. If it cannot have a pilot flame, it will not have a primary flame. So very, very common for maintenance on these heaters. So I've taken my picks, I've cleaned the ventilation hole, I've taken the atomizer screen out. While your atomizer screen is out, take a little bore brush. And what I'm doing is I'm going down in here, but I'm not just cleaning where the screen is. I'm trying to get below the screen. I'm trying to get down in the chamber here. If you have a buildup of any type of chemicals that didn't burn properly, like additives that have a heavy concentration of metals in them, it will build up a crust right here, and that can damage your burner chamber. So while your atomizer screen is out, take your brush, push it down in there, and it'll bottom out, but get down in the chamber. Just once or twice. Now I take my new atomizer screen, and remember, please do them both at the same time. I take the new atomizer screen, there's a set of welds on it. The welds on the tool that comes with it, there's a notch. I like to line the notch up with the weld so I know where they're at. I take the welds and face them away from the ventilation hole. I slide it in there. Your tool must seat all the way down. That sets the depth of the screen. You've cleaned the ventilation hole. You took a bore brush down through there. You've set the depth of your atomizer screen. You screw your igniters in and continue replacing all the gasket if need be. Make sure you're lubing your O-rings to put them back in, and reassemble your heater, which we will do now. Okay, now that the glow pins are in and they're snug down, don't forget to put your gasket on. I do it all the time. I get things together and all of a sudden I look down and here's my gasket. So don't forget the gasket. The grommet has some keyways in the side. The one that's considered the long, and this is considered the short, the long I usually put through this side because it's just the wires seem to line up a little nicer. And the other side, which would be considered the short down below, I will do on this side. And there's some slots it goes in. Okay, that grommet, and we kind of snug everything up here a little bit because the grommet's got to be pushed down. Now, I'll usually start one bolt to keep the grommet in place. I'll set this down. I'll align the grommet in the slots at the same time of trying to find the bolt hole. This is back to the T25. I'll start on my screws first. These get snugged in tightly by hand. This is where I prefer not to use a cordless or any type of impact. If you do, turn your torque down. Okay, my wires are here. You can see you have long and short. Now we're gonna put the water jacket on. I will set the water jacket on. When you put the screws in that hold the water jacket on, please put them diagonally, or snug them down diagonally, I should say. So I'll start them all. I do snug, go to the opposite corner, diagonally, snug. Now when I do these two, I will actually tighten these two and then go back and finish tightening the other two. This just helps assure that you get a good seal on the gasket. I will lay my sensors back up through the slot. I will plug them in. The sensors are easier if they're on the bottom side of the igniters. When you put the sensor in, your temperature sensor, when you put it in, try to make sure the wires are smoothly going off towards the casting. If they get up too far, they get caught against the cover. So there's my temp sensor, here's my overheat sensor. I will go ahead and put my clips back on, my retaining clips. They are the same retaining clip, so you don't have to worry. This is now back to the T20. Now that you have your sensors in, one very important note. Remember, when you've replaced your O-rings, use a synthetic lube. No petroleum-based products on the O-rings. But use a synthetic lube on the O-rings themselves before you push the O-rings in. You've tightened your clips. Your sensor wires are laid under the igniter wires. The igniter wires then can nicely lay across into the journal here. This is where I actually will take the clip and the wider side goes up. I set it in here. It slides down until it's level across here. Now, if you take your O-ring for your blower motor, place the O-ring back on your blower motor. Make sure it's seated around the casting, not into the blower motor. At this point in time, I can take the cover and you have the grommet the fuel line goes through. You're going to take that grommet. The fuel line pops through there. The cover now can be snapped back down in. I can take it and turn it over now, and you have long and short. The short, and always refer to your service manuals for the proper positions. You can document the colors that are beside, but I always recommend following the manual off of the positions where they pin. So the long, I will take all of the wires that you see here, except for the flame detector, is here. And you can see if you needed to service the flame detector, it just unpins and unscrews. But I will take the long wires and I will nicely wrap them around the sensor wires and the other igniter. I'll do 2 or 3 wraps, and as you can see, that's actually starting to hold all my wires all together in there because I do not want these wires to come in contact with the hot flame detector. So I wrap them there and I pin them properly per the manual. So you will see long and short in the manual. So please make sure you're doing the right ones in the right spots, and where the white goes and where the brown goes. Please follow the manual. I will pin that there. My coolant pump wire lays through a little pocket right here. I plug in my ECU wires. Everything tucks down. I take the casting from the bottom. It goes back on. 2 screws. These are actually T25s. You snug the bottom down. In this case, I've taken the coolant pump off. I would replace the O-ring, use a synthetic lube to lube it. It sits back in the journal here. There's a band clamp that goes across here, and it just plugs in. At that point, you have completely rebuilt this heater for any component. We've covered how to replace the igniters, the atomizer screens, clean the ventilation holes, the flame detector. If you're going to replace the blower motor, which is also the ECU, you actually remove all the components out of the pinning and it gets replaced. The cover, try not to break it. If you can, take it apart as warm as possible because plastic is more brittle when it's cold. If you happen to break a tab, if you look on the inside, there's actually aligning holes for you to physically screw the cover back down also. I hope the video is helpful for you. And by all means, if you ever need any technical support from Eberspaecher, the phone number is 1-800-387-4800 for technical, and we're always here to help you. Thank you very much.